Colleagues, allow me to go straight into the introduction of our first keynote speaker. It is such an honor for me to introduce to you, colleagues, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, a South African mechanical engineer and computer scientist of note. Professor Marwala is an accomplished scholar with multidisciplinary research interests that include the theory and application of artificial intelligence to engineering, computer science, finance, social science, and medicine. He has an extensive track record in human capital development and has published 23 books and more than 900 papers in artificial intelligence. He is cited well in excess of 8,000 times. Professor Marwala is the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Johannesburg, and prior to this, he was the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Internationalization and the Executive Dean of Engineering and the Built Environment, both positions at the University of Johannesburg. He was a Deputy Chair of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He has served on the board of Nedbank and is a trustee of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. Over to you, Program Director.
At the beginning of 2020, as we commenced the academic year, the media had minor rumbles of a pandemic on the shores of other countries. By mid-March, we were entering a stringent lockdown. COVID-19 was here to stay, quickly becoming our new normal. Higher education institutions were forced to confront an uncertain future. In a 2020 report, KPMG wrote, and I quote, "For many universities, the future arrived ahead of schedule, abruptly and without invitation," close quote. Our universities, communities that buzzed and thronged on campuses were now deserted, with a definite retreat to the online world prompted by the need for social distancing. Looking into the future, it is clear that the concept of concentration of energies into physical spaces, as was done conventionally, will no longer be valid. In 2020, UNESCO estimated that over 1 billion students worldwide were unable to attend traditional spaces of learning due to COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted conventional and traditional modes of teaching and learning in higher education. This has had powerful effects on the higher education landscape, signaling a number of important changes that will likely hold into the post-pandemic future. As I have signaled before, beyond the pandemic, the paradigm shifts that higher education needs to undergo in the fourth industrial revolution stretches beyond just adoption of technology. Landscapes of inequality have been further deepened in this process, leading Fatah and Motala and Menon to interrogate whether pandemic pedagogies of equity, dignity, and justice can emerge from such a context. These are critical questions which societies with deep inequalities need to constantly interrogate. In the last 18 months, we have had to transition to a hybrid model of learning or what is termed as emergency remote teaching. We did so in a rush. We did so in order to ensure that no students were left behind. Today, with the hindsight of lessons learned, we can begin conversations on how we harness the benefits of technology without displacing the important physical spaces of a university. Universities as communities are critical spaces for learning and remain pivotal to making higher education more than just buildings. Online learning is defined as post-secondary and credit-bearing coursework completely delivered through online courses via a learning management system such as Blackboard or Moodle, while the learning experience occurs in synchronous or asynchronous environments using different devices such as mobile phones or laptops with internet access. Synchronous and asynchronous learning are buzzwords in the new pandemic lexicon, differentiating between teaching and learning that takes place together and that which occurs separately or individually. They also feature prominently in research on blended learning, which predates the rise of online learning and originally related to different forms of instruction and content delivery. Bryan and Volchenkova argue that the terminology has increasingly come to specifically refer to the mix of education and technology, where the use of technology is integrated into the learning process rather than merely used to deliver, for example, a single activity, and where part of the learning is self-directed and paced, and part occurs within a fixed, usually collective space, often face-to-face. Blended learning is thus at least bimodal in form, but takes on a range of models in implementation, ranging from online learning, supplementing class-based instruction, to a near full online mode where contact is reserved for dedicated, often one-on-one support sessions. Globally, the education sector's response to the pandemic could be classed as a diversity of forms of blended learning, though more accurately described as emergency remote teaching and learning, due to the ad hoc, largely provisional nature of the shift to blended and online delivery. We can now cease to call it ERT. We have had the opportunity to adopt and adapt, plan and execute with increased diligence and pedagogical intent. However erroneous, online learning does not come with the same perceptions of prestige or expectations of quality associated with the brick and mortar university. This is in part due to the mushrooming of online providers in the for-profit education sector with shorter lifespans and institutional histories that national or specialist education providers, such as parochial schools, Waldorf or Montessori. Over time, particularly in the last 2 decades, we have witnessed a shift in the discourse around online education, especially as the online providers have become major players in the homeschooling and distance education markets. There is an implicit opposition established between online and contact teaching, especially given the primacy of contact mode for practice-based professionals and vocations such as medicine, engineering, teaching, and performing arts. On one level, this can be associated with the importance of the contact mode for providing students the opportunity for collaborative work with peers, tutors, and lecturers, as well as developing familiarity with the tools, environments, and techniques foundational to their area of specialization. On another, more abstract level, there is the awareness that students convert theoretical knowledge into practical expertise through ongoing practice, sometimes guided by others, sometimes learned through self-teaching or peer learning. Online learning can be viewed as an inadequate replacement in this regard because it leaves open-ended the question of how students gain specialist competency and mastery in their field without regular practice, engagement, and those forms of organic learning and assessment associated mostly strongly with the physical classroom interaction, not only the lesson itself. This is not to say that there haven't been immense strides made in the development of online teaching and learning modalities. And indeed, the pandemic has served as an impetus for scholars, practitioners, designers, and tech companies to search for new tools and interventions that can more effectively support the educational experience. The ideas lying around have resulted in fascinating experiments with learning tools such as Mentimeter, an interactive presentation platform that allows teachers and students to post and answer questions, resources, and web links, and Kahoot, a game-based learning platform. Some, such as Google Classroom, have been around and in use for a longer period of time, while others have been refined in the course of the pandemic experience as more users find these tools useful. Universities have had experience using LMS to manage and support the contact teaching and learning process, but have recently been called to think anew about how the LMS and related digital resources can be used to drive education on demand. These changes are not without their critics or their evident drawbacks, including that as teaching and learning moves online, even for contact institutions, there are equity concerns that need to be taken into account. During the pandemic, South African institutions offered zero-rated websites which did not require mobile data for access in recognition of the high cost of mobile data and internet that acted against students' ability to continue their learning. There were also shortages of devices and challenges in getting all students able to access the LMS assignments, online classes, and tests. These are important considerations for future planning as they require a balance of innovation and pragmatism. One source of inspiration may be previous excursions in open and distance learning on the continent in countries such as Zimbabwe and Ethiopia. Radio, television, and USSD services have been used to support distance education in recognition of the uneven distribution of internet access and reliable network coverage. As scholars have recommended, future work on integrating online and contact teaching cannot prioritize the fun aspects of online and digital learning at the expense of the nuts and bolts issue of ensuring that learning takes place is accessible to all, especially the most vulnerable, and is effective. However, this is not to suggest that the online mode does not have its own benefits, especially given the high cost of higher education and the possibilities that exist for expanding the breadth of educational opportunities that institutions can offer. Universities in Australia, for example, have experimented with offering stackable courses and micro-credentials that enable these big institutions to successfully compete with private online providers from a stronger institutional, professional, and academic position. This has allowed students from all walks of life and professional backgrounds to engage in learning that supports their aspirations. There are also institutions in places such as Brazil that enable indigenous communities to participate in higher education while sharing local knowledge and expertise with formal research communities, strengthening capacity for environmental and agricultural interventions that work. Part of what makes these interventions work is the radical shift in the discourse from what online education lacks in comparison to the contact mode, to how the online mode can support, expand, and strengthen what the contact institution has to offer. We should cease talking about online modalities as a deficit model. This includes opening up education possibilities to a wider student and community, enabling students to work, practice, and engage at a more local level, e.g. shifting practice-based work to sites in close proximity to their homes, freeing up space for institutions to specialize, experiment with new offerings, and build collaborative courses with partners nationally, regionally, and internationally, as well as deepening the kinds of partnerships that can support internationalization in the absence of mobility. These prospects require higher education to think differently about the relationship between global and local, how globalization could take place and support local needs and priorities, as well as how universities can balance their fundamental and applied research and practice prospects. Our journey into the future in higher education has exciting possibilities. We in South Africa have a strong commitment to a socially just society, and as we move forward embracing the endless possibilities of technologies, we have to bear in mind constantly that we are still living in a digitally skewed society. In advancing a highly disruptive era, a blurring of lines between contact and online, evolving new modes of delivery and operations, we must bear in mind that it rests on our higher education system and the country to ensure that our students have access to the required technologies. While some have been sounding the death knell for traditional higher education, there is hope and renewed joy that higher education will emerge refreshed and renewed. As Peters notes, the key question for the system is whether we want to examine its parts, make an assessment, and decide whether we want to help fix it or look for a better engine. My view is that we are in a window of opportunity. We can choose to seize the moment and work deliberately and strategically to maneuver a world that has multiple tipping points. These are unavoidable, and our conversation needs to commence on how we work with what we have and keep an eye for unfolding developments in the world of technology, AI, and the fourth industrial revolution. It is a misnomer to believe that the 4IR is an event with a finite beginning and end. We will constantly be in transitions between multiple worlds. If higher education has to be relevant, we need to be one step ahead of the game. Both the pandemic and the 4IR are game changers. We can choose to be a key player in the game or reconcile ourselves to being bystanders and lose. Milton Friedman, the famous economist, claimed that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. More recently, debates on the 4IR have intrinsically linked to debates on higher education. The reality is that if all sectors and industries are rapidly transforming, what does this mean for the higher education sector? Of course, whilst in the midst of these valuable debates, a new global order prompted by COVID-19 has created further upheavals and disruptions. These are now in the mix and must be considered when charting our path into the future. Ngiyabonga. Thank you very much. Ndiyalibuka.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
Thank you, Program Director, for the opportunity to now run this Q&A session. But let me also start by expressing my sincere gratitude to Professor Marwala for a really exciting presentation. Thank you, Prof. You will be aware, of course, that you will now have initiated a lot of interest from people. And so let us look at some of the questions that colleagues will be asking you. I'm trying to manage this session, but Jabulo, I cannot see the hands.
Okay, Prof.
They are hidden from me here.
I have one from Reina Abraham, and she asks, it is therefore necessary that we all have access to technology. How do we make access to technology a human right? Reina, there are quite a few. Maybe I'll allow Prof to answer, and then we can move to other questions. There are also comments as well, Prof. Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you very much. No, I think access to technology is a human rights issue. But the problem is that different countries have different capabilities of giving their citizens access to technology. And the reason for that is because the technology is not just a tool, but it is a political economy tool. There are politics of technology, and there are also economics of technology. And the economics of technology is affordability. Now let's just talk about the tools that we have in South Africa and where the bottleneck actually comes in. For students to access online material from their homes, they need devices. It can be an iPad, a tablet. It can be a computer itself. It can be a laptop. And all those things are not made in South Africa. In fact, one of the biggest embarrassment that we all, as educational institutions, we should bear responsibility, is that the African continent never really participated in the third industrial revolution, which is the electronic age. We do not have a homegrown, dynamic electronic industry. So those things have to be imported. And if they have to be imported, complicated issues of the balance of payment come into the picture. Do we have enough foreign currency to import those things become very, very important. So there lies the difficulty. Then, of course, for that person with all those devices, if they have those devices, they need to connect to the university. And there are basically two ways in which they can connect. The first one is using what is normally called ADSL, which means you physically connect a cable to your computer, and then you can use wireless. Of course, we know what happened to Telkom. Telkom was supposed to physically connect to your homes, but if you are in Johannesburg, you will have other players. iBest is another example of a player that can come and connect internet, and they can even use fiber, which means it's going to even be faster. And then if you have to go to telecommunication companies, now you have other complications. The cost is one of them. The bandwidth. I always say that if I'm in my village in Limpopo, Tutuni, the MTN does not really work, and Vodacom works because there is in the local high school there is a big Vodacom tower, whereas the MTN tower is not in our village. So the issues of connectivity becomes a challenge. How fast can you be able to connect, and so on and so forth. Now, all those things we can wish them as we want. If we do not have the technical capability to make them happen, then we are in a road to nowhere. South Africa's biggest problem is that its leaders are not technologically adept. We have good ideas, like, for example, the issue of connectivity. The government actually created a company called the Universal Services Agency, USASA. It falls under the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. It collects 1% of revenues from telecommunication companies. And its role is to go and connect in places where those telecommunication companies do not connect because there's not sufficient market demand for them to connect. And you will agree with me, I can't remember any time where the Universal Services Agency was in my village trying to build an infrastructure so that connectivity can happen. So yes, it's a noble idea to make technology a human rights issue, but we have to concentrate on building capability to making access a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for that comprehensive answer. There are just two more inputs which I would like you to respond to. You have partly responded to the one which asks, how do we deal with connectivity issues for students without network coverage? In other words, those that are in deep rural areas where there is no connectivity at all. I think you have already alluded to this, but it would be appreciated if you could speak to it again. And then there is another input here, Prof, which says, I have created an application where if there's no network connectivity, information is stored on the application and automatically uploads when connectivity and data return. It is possible to find other ways to assist students and staff to work remotely and wirelessly. Perhaps you could also comment on this particular input. Over to you, Prof.
No, thank you very much. I will start with the second one because it's the easy one. Yeah, I mean, we all know about, going to my local town is Toyando to download things, because I know I can't be able to download them in my village, and then I will go and work, But it is still inconvenient because somebody has to drive or to take a taxi, and it makes a faster response a problem. So there is no excuse why in South Africa we can't have a wall-to-wall a good internet. There's no excuse. We have all the tools. Wherever the market forces are not working, the Universal Services Agency simply must use that amount, billions and billions of rands that it collects to go and make that connectivity possible. Unfortunately, every time we hear about the Universal Services Agency, it is about tenders and irregularities around tenders and so on and so forth. But we need to get it to work. Because if we don't get it to work, no matter how much we wish, if somebody is in a place where there is no infrastructure to connect, that connectivity is not going to happen. Then the second issue, which is the controversial one, and I got this from the European Chamber of Commerce in South Africa. So for telecommunication companies to be able to broadcast, to be able to give you access to telecommunication services, they need something called spectrum. They need something called spectrum. Now, spectrum is in frequency, for those of us who are scientists who understand this very well. It's measured in hertz after Professor Hertz, who was a German physicist, who came up with this concept. And we have not issued spectrum in the last 15 years. That is why our telecommunication connectivity is struggling. That is why our move to 5G is actually stalled. We have not issued spectrum for the last 15 years. Granted, we almost issued spectrum last year, and Telkom took the whole process back to court. And we don't know. We hope it is going to happen soon, because it is making connectivity slower and slower. What the European Chamber actually taught me, they came to me and said, as the deputy chair of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, that they actually don't believe they should be using MTN spectrum. They don't believe that if it is BMW and you have a robot on one side of the factory, that means to communicate with a robot on the other side of the factory, they don't need that communication. They don't think that communication should be done using MTN, Vodacom, or any other telecommunication company. They believe companies must now be given their own spectrum. And I agree with them. It goes by extension that universities must actually start getting spectrum. Because telecommunication, especially in the era of online learning, is actually a currency that we can't afford to have to rely on other forces. One of the things that we are doing here in Johannesburg, between VETS and UJ, is to create a virtual 5G network from Bramfontein covering VETS students to Auckland Park covering UJ students. What it is basically saying is that, what I'm basically saying is that universities are becoming a technological entities. I keep on hearing that banks are becoming a technological. I heard Michael Jordan, one of the founders of FNB, saying that banks are becoming technological gadgets. Because that app that you have, that you use in order to transact, is not serviced by an accountant. It's serviced by an engineer. That whole system, is no longer created by somebody before. When the branches were physical, somebody will come and build the branch and do all sorts of things. Now it's just an engineer who actually does everything. So even universities are becoming technological entities with a need to reach our students, to get better platforms for teaching, and all those are technological decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. I believe we can take a few more questions. There is one question here, and from Professor Gibson. How can we develop digital literacy in an online remote setting, especially with access issues to data and devices. And then if I can add another one from Prof. Gibson as well. I don't know if this is a continuation of the same question, which reads, an ethics of care is important for remote teaching and learning pedagogies. How can we integrate some of the affordances of new digital and media connectivity and the social online remote teaching and learning, rather than only focusing on content and assessment? The last one is from an anonymous attendee. He is commenting, outside classroom issues still impact student progress, regardless of being online or face-to-face. Issues pertaining to GBV, mental health, funding will be present. As academia, we need to advocate for well and resilient, connected students. We also need to include conversations on student holistic wellness and vitality when we speak of connectivity. Thanks, Prof.
No, thank you very much. I mean, the issue of digital literacy is also a human rights issue. And I actually believe that universities must actually be at the forefront of this. Here at the University of Johannesburg, we were given 200 million rands by the city of Johannesburg to create what is termed the Digital Ambassadors Program, where we train people, a lot of them, and mainly students, obviously, because it becomes an avenue to give students working experience, to go into the city with devices that we have bought and teach about digital literacy. From just connectivity, my mother is connected, and she's on Zoom and she's on all this. Somebody had to teach her that, so that you can be creating a digital literate society. Then at the university, and I feel very, very strongly about this. When I was a young man, I started off as an undergrad student at the University of Cape Town. And I was studying mechanical engineering. And I transferred to United States. So I more or less understood how the curriculum at University of Cape Town looked like. But when I arrived in North America, I was a little bit shocked about the curriculum. All the core subjects were there, mechanics, calculus, and so on and so forth. But what shocked me was when they told me that they are expecting, I am required to take 12 semesters of human and social sciences. I took 2 psychology classes, which I never thought was going to be useful. And now in artificial intelligence, my area of research, reinforcement learning is a big algorithm. The first time I heard about reinforcement learning was in my psychology class. So we need to reorientate our curriculum so that those who are in the human and social sciences also do technological subjects, and those who are in the technological subjects also do human and social sciences. How have we done this at the University of Johannesburg? We have 2 compulsory courses for all our students. So they cannot graduate without completing these 2 courses, but the 2 courses, they get separate certificates. One of them is Africa Insights module. Everybody has to take Africa Insights module, which talks about African politics, African literature, African history, and so on and so forth. Obviously, naturally, it's not deep because it covers many, many areas, but you want them to be aware of the breadth of issues that are confronting the African continent, with a view that in the future, when they become innovators, they will be innovating to solve those problems. The second course that we did, I did a PhD in artificial intelligence at the University of Cambridge. It's actually Introduction to Artificial Intelligence. It is actually a compulsory subject at the University of Johannesburg. All the students have to take it. The course does not make you an expert. You won't even program, but it tells you what this technology is about, what it can be able to do, where has it been applied, what are some of the ethical issues that are actually around this whole technology, and so on and so forth. Now, coming to the online, you are completely correct that the issues of online, certainly from where I am seated, I was worried about two things. I was worried about content, and I was worried about connectivity. And connectivity meant data. So I pay about 9 million rands every month to give all my students 30 gigs. And 30 gigs is not enough to teach. That is a fact. So the classrooms must be shorter, and there are ethical issues around that. They must be shorter, and they must not be too rich in images, because if you have too many videos, rich videos, then you are actually going to it's not going to last for a month. 30 gigs is not going to last for a month, definitely. So there are other issues that we need to really think about. I mean, the issue of villages that are not that do not have access to technology, I must confess, is a problem that we thought it was too big for us. We couldn't solve it. And we were hoping that if you live in a village where there's no connectivity, then you will have to go to a relative who lives in a place where there is connectivity. But we also did something. We said, any student who does not want to go home can stay. During the hard lockdown, the University of Johannesburg actually had over 1,000 students on campus. So we never really told people to really leave. If they really wanted to stay, they could stay. Now, the last one is performance. We actually found that the online learning, in the online learning settings, the students actually performed better than contact. We also found that students seem to go into Blackboard, which is the teaching and learning platform that we use, much more than when there was no lockdown. Because these platforms, we use blended learning, we already use them. So it was clear that during lockdown, the class attendance or engaging with the material was higher than before. Part of the real people were telling me that you no longer have nightclubs and students are sitting at home, so they have to work. The explanation for performance is that when, during the time when it was physical classes, you go to a class, the professor teaches. If you miss something, that's it. But as if it is recorded, you can always rewind. You can always listen to the same class over and over again until you actually understand it. So there are advantages. And what we found, our success rates during pre-COVID was 85%. And during COVID, on online platform was 89%. And some people might say, many people were saying maybe it's the standards, but I think it is because the students were actually quantitatively more engaged with the learning material. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. it's unfortunate that we cannot take any more questions. They were really piling up and the list was getting very, very long. But unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not be able to take any more questions. Therefore, please allow me, Prof. Marwala, to express our sincere gratitude for engaging with us and giving us such a rich engagement on issues that are facing the universities in South Africa and abroad, and the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you so much, sir.